My sibling tried to get me written out of our parents' will, but their plan backfired in the most unexpected way. Family dynamics can get complicated, but I never imagined that mine would take such a dramatic turn. My sibling, who I always considered close, had always been a little competitive. But when I found out they were trying to get me written out of our parents' will, I was shocked. They had convinced our parents that I wasn't responsible enough to manage their estate when the time came. They didn't count on me finding out, and I definitely didn't count on the way their plan would backfire. What followed was a roller coaster of emotions, revelations, and a bit of sweet justice. It all started when I got a strange phone call one afternoon. It was from our family lawyer, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, so I was a little caught off guard. "Hi, my name," the lawyer said, his voice formal but warm. "I wanted to check in with you regarding some recent updates to your parents' estate planning." Estate planning? My heart dropped into my stomach. I knew my parents were getting older, but they hadn't mentioned anything about making changes to their will. "What updates?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my mind was racing. The lawyer continued, "Well, your sibling's name, has brought up some concerns about your ability to manage your share of the estate. They've suggested that we might want to make some changes to the will." I froze. What was he talking about? My sibling, the one I'd always been close to, wanted to question my responsibility? I knew we weren't always on the same page, but this felt like a direct attack. I quickly ended the call, promising the lawyer I'd think about it, but inside, I was stunned. I immediately reached out to sibling's name to ask what was going on, but they were evasive, brushing it off like it was no big deal. They insisted, "Oh, it's just a misunderstanding, don't worry about it. You know how our parents can get with their estate planning." But something about their response didn't sit right with me. Why would they be bringing up concerns about me, of all people? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way my sibling had brushed off my questions made it clear that there was more to the story than they were letting on. So I decided to dig deeper. A few days later, I made a trip to our parents' house under the guise of just hanging out. I tried to keep things light, chatting about random topics before I finally brought up the issue with the will. "Hey, I had a weird call from the lawyer yesterday," I said, testing the waters. "They mentioned some changes to the estate plan. Can you fill me in?" My parents exchanged a quick glance. "We've been thinking about some updates," my mom said, hesitating. "But we didn't want to make a big deal out of it." I pressed on. "What kind of updates? I know we've never really talked about the will, but if something's changing, I'd like to know." Dad sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Well, we've been worried about you two, about who would manage things if something were to happen. We want to make sure everything's in order." That didn't sound too bad, but I could tell my mom wasn't quite as comfortable with the conversation. "We've just been doing some reevaluating," she added quietly. "You know, for peace of mind." I knew I had to push a little harder to get the truth. "So, what's this about sibling's name, suggesting that I might not be responsible enough to handle things? What's that about?" There was an awkward pause. My parents exchanged another glance, but this time it felt more uncomfortable. "Sibling's name just has some concerns about how things will be handled in the future," Dad said, finally giving in. "They worry about how you've been managing your finances. They thought you might not be able to handle the responsibility." That hit hard. I had always been the responsible one. I had a stable job, handled my finances well, and had never given anyone a reason to doubt me. I didn't understand why my sibling would do something like this. "Wait," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger bubbling up inside me. "Are you telling me they want me out of the will?" Mom looked guilty, but Dad seemed more resigned. "It's not that simple," he replied, his voice quieter now. "We haven't made any final decisions, but your sibling has been very persistent about it." After that conversation, my mind was in overdrive. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sibling, the person I had trusted most in the world, had tried to get me written out of our parents' will. I'd always thought we were on the same page when it came to family, but this felt like a complete betrayal. That night, I sat in my apartment, going over everything in my mind. I couldn't ignore the fact that my sibling had been increasingly distant over the past few months, avoiding family gatherings, being overly secretive, and now, this. It seemed like a calculated move. They'd likely been plotting for a while, using their position to manipulate our parents into questioning my ability to manage anything. I couldn't just let this slide. I had to confront them. But how? How do you confront someone you've always been close to about something so manipulative and hurtful? I realized I couldn't do it alone. If I was going to take action, I needed a strategy. I reached out to a few trusted friends to talk things through. Mia, in particular, had been my sounding board for years, always providing a clear-headed perspective. After filling her in, she was just as shocked as I was. "They really did that?" she asked, her tone filled with disbelief. "I mean, it's one thing to have concerns, but to try to get you written out of the will? That's crossing a line." I nodded. "I can't let them get away with it. Not only because it's unfair, but because it's making me question everything about our relationship." Mia was quiet for a moment before replying. "You have to confront them, but you also need to protect yourself. This isn't just about the will anymore. It's about what's going on behind the scenes. If they're willing to do this to you, who knows what they'll do next?" Her words stuck with me. She was right. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. It was about trust and respect, and I wasn't going to let my sibling destroy that. The next weekend, I called my sibling to ask if we could meet up. I didn't want to confront them over the phone. I wanted to see their face when I brought everything into the light. After some back and forth, they agreed to meet at a coffee shop we used to frequent when we were kids. When I arrived, they were already sitting at a table, looking at their phone. I took a deep breath before walking over. It felt like a lifetime ago when we'd have easy conversations, joking about anything and everything. Now, everything felt loaded, like this conversation was about to change everything. I sat down, and for a moment, there was an awkward silence. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "How's everything going?" They shrugged, their usual smile nowhere to be seen. "Same old stuff. Busy. You?" "I'm good," I said, but my words felt hollow. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something important." Their eyes flickered nervously, and they set their phone down. "What's up?" I leaned forward, looking them straight in the eye. "I know what you've been doing. I know you've been trying to get me written out of the will. I don't know why you do that, but I'm not going to let you get away with it." Their face went pale. For a moment, they didn't say anything, just stared at me like a deer caught in headlights. Then they started to fidget with their coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. I don't know what you're talking about," they stammered, but I could see the guilt in their eyes. I pulled out my phone and showed them the texts and emails I had found, everything pointing to their manipulative behavior. "I've seen the messages. I've spoken to Mom and Dad. Don't try to lie to me." There was a long pause, and then they finally spoke, their voice small. "I didn't want to hurt you. I thought you'd be better off without the responsibility. You've always been the good one, and I'm not sure if I can live up to that. It wasn't about you. It was about what I thought was best for the family." I blinked in disbelief. "So, you thought getting me written out of the will was the solution? You've been trying to manipulate Mom and Dad for months, and now you're telling me it was all for the greater good?" They looked down, avoiding my eyes. "I didn't want to deal with all the pressure. You're always the one they trust, and I felt like I wasn't good enough to handle it." It wasn't an excuse. It was a poor, misguided attempt at covering up their selfishness. But hearing them admit it was almost worse than anything else. I sat back, processing their words. I could feel the anger rising again, but I kept it in check. This wasn't just about what my sibling had done. It was about the fact that they had assumed I wouldn't stand up for myself. They thought they could manipulate our parents, manipulate me, and I wasn't going to let that happen. "You're right about one thing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're not good enough to take control of things the way you think you are, but not because of some moral failing. It's because you chose the easy way out. You chose deception. You thought you could outmaneuver me, but all you've done is create a mess you can't clean up." They flinched at my words, and I could tell they weren't ready for the reality of the situation. I wasn't angry at them for being insecure anymore. I was angry that they had jeopardized my relationship with our parents and tried to undermine my trust in them. "I never wanted to hurt you," they whispered, almost pleading now. "I just didn't know how to handle it all." I shook my head. "You didn't need to handle anything. You needed to be honest. You could have come to me, and we could have worked something out. But instead, you decided to tear me down and use our family's resources for your own benefit." The silence that followed was thick with regret and guilt. I could see the tears starting to form in their eyes. Part of me wanted to soften, to comfort them. But the other part of me, the one that felt betrayed, held firm. "You need to go to Mom and Dad and come clean," I said, my tone colder now. Tell them what you've been trying to do. Don't make me handle this for you. You have to fix the damage you've caused. For a moment, they just sat there, speechless. But I knew they had no choice. They could either try to deny everything and let the situation spiral further, or they could take responsibility and try to make things right. I wasn't going to do the work for them. I'll talk to them, they said quietly, defeated. I'll tell them everything. The next few days were a blur. My sibling and I barely spoke after our confrontation, and I focused all my energy on processing everything. I had always trusted them, believed that we were a team, and now that trust had been shattered. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew things couldn't go back to how they were. Then, 2 days later, I got a call from my mom. Her voice was shaky, and I could tell she was upset. "Can you come over? We need to talk." I didn't hesitate. As much as I wanted to avoid the uncomfortable confrontation, I knew it was time to face the music. When I arrived at their house, my sibling was sitting on the couch, their eyes red. They looked guilty and ashamed, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Mom and Dad were in the kitchen, looking serious but calm. "We've had a long talk with Sibling's name," Dad began when I walked in. "They've confessed everything, about trying to have you removed from the will." I nodded, keeping my emotions in check. "I know." My sibling looked at me, their eyes filled with regret. "I'm so sorry," they said quietly. "I thought I was doing the right thing by protecting myself, and in some twisted way, protecting you from all the responsibilities. But I was wrong. I let fear control my decisions." There was something raw in their voice, an apology that felt genuine. But as much as I appreciated the sincerity, it didn't undo what had happened. I knew I needed to hear it, but I also knew the road ahead was going to take time. "I don't know why I thought doing that would solve anything," they continued. I didn't know how else to handle my own insecurities about the future. I could see they were genuinely remorseful, and for the first time, I could see the weight of their actions on their face. It wasn't easy, but it felt like a moment of reckoning for them. "I don't expect everything to go back to normal right away," I said, "but I need you to understand that what you did hurt me, deeply. You didn't just jeopardize our family's trust, you jeopardized my relationship with you." There was a long silence, but eventually they nodded, their eyes downcast. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I'm truly sorry." The conversation that day wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It wasn't going to magically fix everything, and it certainly didn't erase the hurt I was feeling. But it was a start. My sibling's apology felt genuine, and I appreciated the effort. But trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. Over the next few weeks, things were awkward between us. We had a few more heart-to-heart talks, and I could see that they were trying to be transparent and open. They reached out more often, asking how I was doing and trying to make amends in small ways. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. However, what truly helped was when they took the initiative to speak with our parents directly, apologizing for their actions and admitting the full extent of what they had tried to do. Watching them take responsibility was hard, but I respected it. Our parents, to their credit, accepted the apology, but they made it clear that the relationship needed to be repaired slowly and that their actions weren't going to be forgotten just yet. I also noticed a shift in how they interacted with me. They stopped being evasive and started being more involved in family activities again. Slowly, they began to show through their actions that they were committed to making things right. But the process was still slow, and I wasn't ready to let my guard down completely. For my part, I spent a lot of time reflecting on everything. I'd always been the reliable one in the family, the one people could count on. And I realized that my siblings' betrayal had shaken my confidence in myself as well. I had to remind myself that I wasn't responsible for their insecurities, nor was I obligated to take on their burden of guilt. Weeks passed, and as time went on, I noticed a subtle but significant change. My sibling began to show up in ways they hadn't before, reaching out to me about family plans, checking in more regularly, and doing their part to help with things around the house. It wasn't just about trying to patch things up with our parents anymore. It seemed like they were actually trying to reconnect with me too. One evening, we were having dinner together when my sibling said something that caught me off guard. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I'm working on myself. I don't want to be the person who did that to you anymore." I looked up, surprised at the sincerity in their voice. "I know you're trying, but it's going to take time," I replied honestly. I'm not sure I can just forget about what happened, but I can see you're putting in the effort. They nodded, their expression serious. I don't expect you to forget it, but I'm going to keep showing you that I can be better. I've started seeing a counselor to work through some of my issues with feeling insecure. I want to learn how to handle things without making stupid decisions. It was the first time I felt like they truly understood the depth of their actions. They were taking real steps, not just for the family's sake, but for their own personal growth as well. That moment shifted something in me. It wasn't just an apology anymore. It was clear that they were actively working to change. While it didn't mean everything was healed instantly, I began to see my sibling in a new light. Their attempt to make amends wasn't just about appeasing me, it was about bettering themselves and facing their own flaws head on. And I knew that, at least for now, that was all I could ask for. Over the next few months, things between my sibling and me started to feel more natural. We spent time together in a way we hadn't in years. It wasn't always perfect, and there were moments of tension when the past would rear its ugly head. But there was something different about our interactions. It felt more honest, and I could tell my sibling was putting in the work to regain my trust. One weekend, we went on a small hiking trip, something we used to do all the time when we were younger. As we sat by the fire that night, our conversation took an unexpected turn. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened a lot," my sibling began, staring into the flames. "And I realized that I've always envied the way you handle everything so calmly. You're always the one with your life together, and I never really understood how much pressure that put on you." I wasn't expecting them to say that. For years, I'd always felt like I was the one doing everything right, while they struggled. But hearing them admit that it had weighed on them in a way I hadn't seen was eye-opening. "I never meant to try and tear you down," they continued. "I was so caught up in my own fears and insecurities that I thought the only way to feel better was to make you seem less capable. But now I realize how messed up that is." I let their words sink in. "It's taken me a while to come to terms with everything, but I think I get it now," I said, looking at them. "You weren't just afraid of not being good enough. You were afraid of not being enough at all. And that's not something I can fix for you, but I can support you, and I'll be here if you ever need me." They smiled for the first time in a long while, the weight of the past few months lifting from their shoulders. "I don't expect anything from you. I've already asked too much, but I promise I'm trying." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a moment of real healing, one that I didn't think would ever happen after everything that went down. With time, things between my sibling and me grew stronger. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about understanding why it had happened and how we could move forward. For the first time in months, I genuinely felt like we were on the same page again. We spent more time together, not just as family, but as two people who had been through a trial by fire and came out the other side with a new sense of respect and understanding. My sibling continued with therapy, working through their insecurities, and I could see the positive changes they were making. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Months passed, and life moved on. We both made sure to show up for each other in small ways. Birthdays, family gatherings, and even impromptu movie nights became opportunities for us to rebuild the bond we'd once shared. Our parents also noticed the shift, and while they were still cautious, they were glad to see us working through our differences. As for the will and our parents' estate planning, things were finally put to rest. My sibling admitted to trying to manipulate the situation, but they did it in a way that allowed everyone to heal. Our parents revised the will with the understanding that both of us would be treated fairly, with full transparency. One evening, my sibling and I were sitting together, reflecting on everything that had happened. "I don't know how I could have been so stupid," they said, shaking their head, "but I'm glad you didn't give up on me." "I don't think I could have walked away, even if I wanted to," I said with a soft smile. "You're my family. We just had to find our way back." And in that moment, I realized that the journey we'd taken together, the mess, the betrayal, the rebuilding, had ultimately made us stronger. We weren't just siblings anymore. We were two people who had faced the worst in each other and still chose to move forward. That was something I would never take for granted again. Looking back at everything, I can say with certainty that sometimes betrayal doesn't just tear you down. It teaches you how to rebuild yourself and your relationships. Family can be messy, complicated, and sometimes even hurtful. But in the end, it's the effort to understand each other and make things right that makes all the difference. Have you ever had to confront a family member about something that shook your trust? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from the experience? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear how others have navigated similar challenges. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more personal growth stories and lessons. Thanks for reading.